All right, Wade Allison, professor of physics at the University of Oxford. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's nice to be here.
So, yeah, we're going to talk about your energy future vision and the vision of the future in general. But first, I want to talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you got into the nuclear space to begin with.
Well, it's a bit strange, really, because I come from completely a non-academic family. I think in the old days, people used to run away to sea, but my family was naval, and so running away to sea wasn't quite the way to get away from the family and do my thing. So I went into academia, and they certainly couldn't follow me there. Might as well be the other side of the world. Well, I went to school in the normal way, and I grew up in the wartime when things were quite stressed and the British were wonderful feeding the children. There was always food, but not for very long. And so I still can't leave my plate with food on it. But anyway,
It's good.
At the age of 13, we went to, my parents went on holiday, and happened to be in Geneva. And my parents took us into the center of Geneva, and there was a big exhibition on, which was Atoms for Peace, which was Eisenhower's thing. And that is how I got into science. It's funny the way people get started.
Yeah.
And so some years later, I came back and, I then did science at Cambridge and started a doctorate at Oxford. And I went out to Geneva again, to CERN, and spent most of my professional career teaching and doing experiments at CERN and learning how the universe works. And
to cut you off for a second, for some of our listeners who maybe don't know, if you want to explain what the Atoms for Peace Eisenhower speech was about and why it motivated you. It's our theme song here at Titans of Nuclear, but we don't explain it a lot.
Well, of course, I didn't understand in those days that Eisenhower and the Allies were very busy trying to promote nuclear for peaceful purposes because it had got such a bad name from the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think the world was not. It was in such a bad state at the end of the war that it was shock horror when Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, and they didn't understand what had happened, and in a way were still in the backwash of that now.
Right.
So they were putting on this big exhibition, and it was the beginning of nuclear power in the US and in the UK and then in France and so on. And I was there. So I was born before the first nuclear reactor. I've lived all the way through this dreadful mess that we have made of nuclear energy. We really ought to have been able to put it onto the map for everybody, because it's terribly important.
Yeah. So you living through, all the changes in the nuclear industry, where do you think we went wrong? And how do you think that we can change it?
I'll tell you what, I think people still don't understand this. I think the problem is not a technical problem. Most nuclear reactors can be made to work. But what cannot be made to work is if people don't understand. Now, when we had, I don't know, we first had fire in the home or thunder and lightning, you teach the children that it's all right, you have to be careful, but it's okay in the end. People are still frightened of nuclear, and what is worse, the media, who are always looking for something that causes excitement, they are excited. They change the story and make a more exciting story, so that, for instance, at Fukushima, nothing happened at all. Nobody was killed by the radiation. But my goodness, did it make a good story. And it runs and runs. And so they go back and do Chernobyl again as well.
Yeah. So why can't we make a story, a big breakthrough story in the media about how nuclear could solve our climate change problems? I mean, that seems like a pretty exciting story to me.
Yeah, that's the exciting story that I'm trying to tell. But the reason it doesn't work is because there's nobody who sees the picture. The people who build nuclear reactors are thinking about how to build the best nuclear reactor and whether it's better than the one the other guys are building.
Technology-wise.
Sorry?
Technology-wise.
Yeah. But nobody is spending the money on teaching the children. And the media see it as an opportunity to cause excitement, which it does very successfully. And the real thing, which is important for climate change, is for people should be crying out for nuclear energy, because it's so safe. I mean, it's so safe. I can go into the science of why it's safe and the biology of why it's safe, but look at the outcome. A very small number of people were killed at Chernobyl, but nobody was killed at Fukushima, and nobody has been killed in the civil nuclear industry since it started. So, I mean, even the hydroelectric dams, when they collapse, in some cases, they've drowned hundreds of thousands of people. It's very dangerous. Even wind and solar are not perfect, but coal and oil, of course, are dreadful. So we've got to get nuclear across.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that it hinders our ability to get the point of using nuclear energy for climate change across when all we do is focus on the safety? Like, do you think that maybe if we talked less about safety, people would be less afraid?
That's you're right. I've seen that you've had Malcolm Grimston on the Titans and Nuclear, and he is a master at this, of saying, you don't go to a restaurant which said, we've had 18 celebrating having 18 months without having a rat in the kitchen. You do not say that. And we see with Boeing now, there's a very serious problem. If the public get the wrong idea, you've got a long way to row back to establish confidence again. So you don't talk about safety, but you make things safe. And that's not difficult. Unfortunately, the other thing that has happened, not only has the media got the wrong idea, but there's a whole industry dedicated to nuclear safety that is built up. And there are people who have sort of Hippocratic oaths to protect people from nuclear radiation. And they don't admit that there isn't a problem because it's their job.
Yeah. You can't lose your job.
No. And then the other thing is, instead of treating this as a local problem for children to learn about and understand and learn about in school and so on, it goes right up the responsibility is kicked right the way up to the United Nations. We don't have United Nations committees to protect against ultraviolet and skin cancer and so on, which is a much more serious problem than anything we get from nuclear radiation. So it's all wrong, and it's the social side of it that's wrong.
Yeah, the social perception of the industry. And so, you're probably pretty biased because you are a professor, but you're mentioning...
I'm not biased because I've never been in the nuclear industry.
Right. You've been in the physics realm?
Yeah. And teaching some wonderfully bright young people and mathematics and so on. So no, I am not biased. Not biased towards the nuclear industry, but you are biased towards the young generation. Oh, yes, I am.
Yeah.
And that's where we've got to start. They are the answer. People of my generation, it's too late. But we have got to get young people to realize it.
Yeah, so conserve our efforts towards educating the younger generation who can bring it forward. Yeah. And you have children and grandchildren, right?
Yes.
Are they in the nuclear industry at all? Have you convinced them?
Oh, no. As I say, my family is not academic, but yes, all my children are if you go and look at what I put on Facebook and Twitter and so on, you'll see that they've been they're liking things, and they've read my books and been to my lectures and so on. So a lot of support there.
Great. And so how do we go about educating the young generation, and how do we, educate on a global scale where we can make the nuclear industry be really sustainable globally? So this young generation from different countries can work together to really focus on markets where nuclear is viable and make it happen in those markets first.
Well, what I have to do is keep my ears and eyes open. And 6 months ago, I got an email from 2 bright young people who had read my book.
Mm-hmm. And what's your book's title?
Radiation and Reason.
Okay.
And it was written before Fukushima, but after Chernobyl. And they said, we want to put the problem of explaining radiation on the stage. They're both graduates of RADA, the UK dramatic art. And one of them's a physicist, and the other's, in fact, comes from a medical family. And so they have set up this thing called Y Theatre, W-H-Y, Y Theatre. And they want to, on the stage, to get people to ask themselves questions. Because people don't change their minds about a big thing like this very quickly. What you have to do is put ideas in their mind and then go away, and in the months, days afterwards, they will slowly change their minds. Mm. You can't just get people to swear that from now on I'm nuclear. They have got exactly the right idea. Anyway, I have been working with them. I haven't seen anything they're doing yet, but I've had big hopes. Now, if they can get off the ground, they're doing a preliminary showing in London and Manchester, and I hope in Oxford, and then they will get a longer run of a few weeks. And if that works, then I hope they will have a longer run in London, take it to the States, and so on and so forth. But they're very bright, and I've got a lot of hope. So you never know, things turn up.
Right. Yeah, and I look forward to seeing those. And it sounds like you guys are making the case for the more exposure we can get of nuclear energy to the public, the more receptive the public will be.
Well, people who live in communities where there is a nuclear power station, it is their jobs, but they're not afraid of it. They're the ones who vote for it. It's the people who are bussed in from outside who object to nuclear energy.
Yeah.
But that I think is always the way, isn't it?
And so let's talk about your vision for the future. How do we get nuclear in more communities and have it be more accepted?
Well, this is a personal view. I think that by going for small nuclear reactors of the kind that are now being looked at in the US and the UK and in Canada and other places as well, small reactors to go with cities of 50, 100,000 people so that the kids in the schools could go and see the reactor. And you're talking about it as this is our reactor which gets our electricity, and you identify with it. Keep the people from outside, the Greens from the next door state, keep them out, it's not their business. This is our reactor for our electricity. We know where it comes from. It's not Russian gas. It's not doesn't come from the Middle East. You cut all those lines which cause international trouble. So energy comes from us here, and it provides hydrogen, which could be used
they gotta be complementary.
as well as batteries for transport, and you can escape all of the problems that renewables have of not being able to run all the time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. It's like small nuclear could really promote energy independence. And make it less of a global market. I mean, you could still have a thriving global market, but you're not reliant on it as much.
I mean, it may be that some Russians or some Chinese or something built the reactor.
Yeah.
But once you've got it and it's supplying your community, you will feel some security. So I think there's lots of room for cooperation, and hopefully we will learn to build our own. But people in the UK and in the US it's so long ago since most of them did build a reactor that it's not something they do every day, and that's why it's costing us a lot of money. So we've got to get back into it.
Yeah. So why do you think? I mean, why shouldn't we just put all of our efforts to getting better at building the reactors that we've already built, these larger reactors that we've already built, and make that supply chain really cost effective and efficient?
Sure. No, I mean, I think right now in the UK, we are building one reactor. I hope we will be building some more. I mean, of the old designs.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we've got a big problem. We've got to pursue both of these channels of making small ones for the day after tomorrow and big ones of the kind whose designs we've already got, doing that today and tomorrow.
Do you think, from a physics / a science standpoint, because you know how nuclear reactors work, could the facilitation of a growing industry of large reactors and small reactors be designed hand in hand, so that they use really similar materials and processes and supply chains?
Well, yes, but the trouble with the big ones is you only produce 2 or 3 of them. If you produce lots of little ones, then Henry Ford comes in and you can mass produce things so that one person has built many, many pieces of the same kind. He knows how to do it. Maybe it's not on a Ford-like production line, but it's a factory-built thing, and that you can ship them in from outside. You can build them in the same place. You don't have to ship the workforce out to a site. Most of the manufacture can be done at in one place. Of course, you've got to build a plant to make those things. So it is a big investment, but provided you can build enough of them. And the other thing is we've got to build these for the rest of the world. It's not just the UK and the US.
Right.
I mean, I've been out to Jakarta and talking to people out there. I get asked for advice from all sorts of places around the world. People in these places, what they've got to do, even more than us, is to educate themselves so that they understand. So when somebody comes along and says, we'll help you build a reactor, you know enough about it that you can learn, they can learn to build it, help to build it, know how it works, look after it, maintain it, take it over after a few years, and so on. That's where the future comes. Now, it's very interesting. The Koreans have built some reactors for the UAE, and there's been problems there. And reading between the lines, I think it's because they didn't spend enough time educating and working with the local Arabian people to do things themselves. So the rest of the world, they couldn't take on a nuclear reactor now, but in 5 years, if they do the work and they work with the people who supply it, then they should be able to do it. And I know that sort of thing that's going on in Indonesia between, in fact, the Indonesians and Thorcon, which is one of the new reactors in the States.
And I like how you mentioned a timeline right there. You said maybe in 5 years. And so on that topic, I have a few questions for you. So my first question would be, growing up through and watching the evolution of the nuclear industry, you also watched the evolution of sort of this problem of climate change because it didn't used to be a prominent issue. And so how have you seen the different generations and the people in the nuclear industry respond to climate change? And also, how do you think that waiting longer to get smaller nuclear will actually be able to mitigate climate change issues? Or do you think it is better to not train people, just build as many large nuclear plants as we can and try to remove as much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as we can?
There's a lot of questions in there.
It's a lot, yeah.
I mean, until 20 years ago, I didn't see nuclear and climate change as having anything to do with one another, separate questions.
Yeah.
But when I saw that ice melting and the glaciers, it's not just one hurricane there or one hurricane there. That's not convincing. But when the ice starts, the ice gets a long memory. When that starts to go, it's serious. And of course, it's not what's happening in the atmosphere, and it's not just the temperature, it's what's happening in the oceans. And in my view, we don't know where this is going to end. I mean, even if we stop emitting CO2 now, I don't believe, just looking at the papers and so on, without being an expert on that, I don't believe we know how bad it's going to be. That's why I think we've got to build the big nuclear reactors that we've got on target at the moment, and work on the small ones and get them going as soon. Both, not either or. But it's interesting. One of the first people who put their finger on all this climate change was James Lovelock. the UK environmentalist and physicist, and he's also got a medical degree. And just to make a note of it, he reaches his 100th birthday on the 29th of July.
Wow.
And I went to see him. But I think all scientists really regard this situation as serious. We know about nuclear. We don't know about climate change enough, except that it is a big, big problem. And then there'll be the floods and so on. Well, and there's water. The world is last week. They've run out of water in Chennai in India, drinking water. There is no water to drink.
Serious problems.
The next century is going to be about water. We're going to solve the nuclear problem, the energy problem, but water. We can't afford to just to throw it away with big hydroelectric and irrigation projects. We've got to use water very efficiently with hydroponics, with internal factory farming, internal farming, vertical farming. You can grow vegetables and grow things inside with energy from a nuclear power station, with LEDs for lights. Forget about the sunlight, forget about the seasons. You can have anything, anywhere, at any time. And it has a very small footprint, and you can leave nature to get on with doing what it does best, which is collecting the CO2 from the atmosphere and have a rewilding of nature. Now, these are ideas that, not mine, but I have come to agree with them just recently, really.
And I mean, we can even use nuclear power to desalinate, ocean water for drinking water.
No, not even. It can be one of the main things. Some people will want hydrogen for gas and transport. Other people will want, but the main idea is, forget about renewables. We should just produce, if you like it, excess nuclear power, and you use the extra that you don't need at night or in the winter or in the when you don't need the electric power. You use it for creating drinking water and desalinating and hydrogen and other things, and charging batteries. But you can't make batteries anything like big enough. And in the last 100 years, people have got used to science being so generous and coming up with all sorts of good ideas. But we know jolly well that there are some things that you can't do, and you can't make batteries 10 times better than we've got now.
Yeah.
It's, you hit the end of the chemistry periodic table. You can't do it. You could make them. You could be clever, perhaps make them twice as good, but it's not going to be a big factor.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because good scientific discoveries take a really long time. And I think that nuclear is a scientific discovery that we've already refined and that, we have ready to use at our disposal, whereas battery storage, we're still having to refine it. And so, when you look at it in a scientific sense, nuclear is very safe and it's very efficient. But I want to step backwards really quickly, because you said that your interest in science and in physics sort of started from Eisenhower's speech. But where did your specific interest in nuclear start?
Oh, I didn't hear his speech. I heard the exhibition.
The exhibition.
I saw the exhibition that was at that time. I was only 13.
Yeah.
I wasn't listening to presidential speeches too much.
From his exhibition. So you got his inspiration from his exhibition. And then your specific interest in nuclear energy, did that come from Fukushima, or where did that start?
Oh, no. I was interested in fundamental physics and understanding how the world worked. That was much more pure scientific. But that's how you get young people to do things. You've got to inspire them. You can't get them to do things just because they're useful. Because they don't, I mean, they're just not too interested in putting out the garbage. You've got to really interest them. And that's why something I think like this why theatre, which was addressed to them, it's much more complicated than anything that anybody just selling nuclear reactors is. So we've got to engage young people.
Yeah, and so as we wrap up here, what's our game plan for inspiring the next generation of leaders in the nuclear energy space?
Well, it got to get into the people I would really like to persuade is the medics. Now, the medics use radiation for medical purposes, for curing cancer all the time. But they're so concerned about litigation and not being about litigation and so on, and what the regulations say, that law has got nothing to do with harming people and our future, just like money has. These two things are invented by us to make life better and make the wheels go round. But law does not understand anything about nuclear radiation, and nor does money, for that matter. So we get these things right, and then the law and the money have got to fit in. It's a physicist talking. I can't remember where I was.
You were saying we have to convince the medics.
But I have to convince the medics, and the medics are dead set against not listening. They only talk about the regulations, and they also think of their patients, and they don't want to scare their patients, so they just tell the patients what they want to hear so that they can get them in and get them treated. And that's a big problem. But children are easier to talk to because they don't know too much before, and they listen. We're talking to young people. There's lots and lots of proper science that can be slotted in if they're able to digest it. But the problem is presenting the story without that, without this is the way we make money, without the legal business, without the scientific detail. But there's a big hope, I think, that with the attitude that the young people have taken in the last 6 months, they've really got into climate change. Now we have to engage them with the nuclear and not the renewables. Because unfortunately, the fossil fuel industry has seen that the only future that they have is to align themselves with the renewables, because the renewables can't work all the time.
Right. So spend our time convincing the children, educating the youth.
And the media. Somehow, we can't get very far without the media. I have terrible trouble getting to the media, which is why I think the things that you can do of getting stuff out there, and you just never know when, rather like Atoms for Peace exhibition or these Y theatre people, you just never know where things are going to work. And that's the big hope. So I go and try and spread the word around everywhere I can.
Yeah, well, hopefully, we can get this episode out to as many ears as we can, and you can be the inspiration for a next generation of leaders in nuclear.
Well, it's not about me. I'll be gone soon. But actually, I can tell you something. It really is good as the years go by to have real ambition to do something as I have. It's good for me.
It is, and it's good for the nuclear field. Thank you so much, Wade Allison.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
Enjoyed talking to you as well.